It all started as a routine day at the gas station, but what happened next was anything but ordinary. The attendant, a young man with a sharp attitude and a habit of cutting corners, was about to make a choice that would change everything. A customer pulled in, a tired, middle-aged woman driving an old, beaten-down car. She seemed hesitant, fumbling for her wallet, her face lined with worry. The attendant, impatient and dismissive, decided to take matters into his own hands. His actions were quick and deliberate, leaving the woman stunned. But just 2 minutes later, as another customer entered the station, something unexpected unfolded. A twist so shocking it left everyone speechless. What could possibly happen in such a short span of time? Stay tuned, because karma works fast. The woman sat in her car, clutching the steering wheel, her face a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She'd only needed a small favor, nothing unreasonable, but the attendant's curt response had left her feeling humiliated. The other customer, a sharply dressed man in a sleek black car, stepped out and caught a glimpse of the scene. He paused for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he observed the attendant's smug expression and the woman's defeated posture. Meanwhile, the attendant returned to his station, seemingly unfazed, scrolling through his phone and ignoring the world around him. Little did he know, the sharply dressed man had quietly taken note of everything. He approached the counter calmly, but there was a glint of purpose in his eyes. The air in the station felt tense, like something was about to shift. The sharply dressed man placed his wallet on the counter, but his focus wasn't on the transaction. "Rough day?" he asked the attendant casually, though his tone hinted at something more. The attendant barely glanced up, brushing off the question with a mumbled response. He was too distracted to notice the man's careful observation of every detail: the hurried service, the dismissive attitude, the lingering unease of the woman in the car. Outside, the woman sat motionless, debating whether to drive off or confront the situation. She'd been running late, juggling too many responsibilities, and this encounter felt like the last straw. From her rearview mirror, she noticed the man in black watching her with a reassuring nod, as if silently telling her to wait. Back inside, the man leaned closer. "You might want to rethink how you treat people," he said. The attendant scoffed, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. The attendant shrugged off the man's words, his arrogance growing. "Look, I don't have time for lectures," he said dismissively, ringing up the transaction. The man's calm expression didn't falter, but there was a quiet intensity in his demeanor. He handed over the money and added, "Sometimes it's the smallest actions that come back the fastest." His tone was polite, yet his words hung in the air like a warning. Outside, the woman finally stepped out of her car, clutching a piece of paper in her hand. Her movements were hesitant, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. She approached the station, glancing at the man, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. The attendant noticed her coming and groaned under his breath, rolling his eyes. Before anyone could say anything, the sound of a phone buzzing broke the tension. The attendant glanced at the screen and froze. His smug expression melted into confusion, then worry. Whatever was on that screen had shaken him. The man in black and the woman exchanged a knowing glance, as if they both sensed something was about to unfold. But what? The air in the station was thick with suspense, and the next moment could change everything. The attendant stared at his phone, his face growing pale. He fumbled with it, swiping the screen nervously, but whatever he saw wasn't going away. His once confident demeanor now cracked, and he seemed almost panicked. The man in black leaned casually against the counter, his calm expression masking the tension building beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the woman, still holding the paper, hesitated just outside the door. She glanced between the attendant and the man as if weighing her next move. Finally, she stepped inside, her voice soft but firm. "Excuse me," she said, directing her words at the attendant. He barely acknowledged her, his attention locked on his phone, muttering under his breath, "This can't be happening." The man in black straightened and turned to the woman, gesturing for her to continue. She placed the paper on the counter, sliding it toward the attendant. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, her voice steady now, though her hands trembled slightly. The attendant finally looked up, his eyes darting between her and the paper, dread creeping across his face. The man glanced at the paper, his lips curling into a knowing smile. "Interesting timing," he said, his voice low and deliberate. The tension in the room reached a breaking point, and it was clear something much bigger was about to unravel. The attendant reluctantly picked up the paper, his hands shaking as he read it. His eyes widened and beads of sweat formed on his brow. How did you?" he stammered, unable to finish his sentence. The paper was a formal complaint addressed to his employer, detailing his rude behavior and lack of professionalism. It wasn't just signed by the woman. It included a witness statement. His eyes flicked to the man in black, who now stood tall, his calm demeanor replaced by quiet authority. "I saw everything," the man said, his voice firm. "I've also sent a report to your company, along with security footage from the station. You should have thought twice before dismissing people like that." The attendant's face turned red with anger and panic. "You can't do this," he snapped. But before he could argue further, his phone buzzed again. He glanced down, his face falling as he read the message. It was from his manager, asking him to report immediately. His voice cracked as he muttered, "They already know." The woman, now standing with more confidence, gave the man in black a grateful nod. She turned to the attendant one last time, her voice calm. "Maybe this will be a lesson in how to treat people." As the attendant slumped back in his chair, defeated, the man in black smiled faintly. "Karma works fast, doesn't it?" he said before walking out the door. The woman followed, leaving the station in stunned silence. Just as the tension began to fade, the sound of another customer entering brought the attendant back to reality. One more reminder that the consequences of his actions had only just begun. As the man and woman walked out, the tension in the station slowly eased, but the lesson lingered. The attendant sat silently, staring at his phone and the complaint letter in front of him. He couldn't shake the realization that his small actions had spiraled into something far bigger. He had never imagined someone would stand up against him, or that karma could come back so quickly. Outside, the woman turned to the man in black and smiled. "Thank you," she said sincerely. He nodded, his expression warm but firm. Sometimes people just need a reminder that every interaction matters. As she drove away, the man lingered for a moment, glancing back at the station. Then, with a satisfied look, he got into his car and left. The day had started ordinary, but ended with an unforgettable lesson for everyone involved.